You are joining Making a Difference with Melissa Clark, a new show that shares the compelling stories and voices of well-known and everyday people who change the world in big and small ways. Enjoy our guests, call in, or just listen to be inspired. For this show was made with you in mind. Please join us every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with our special guests. And you can listen to our recast at www.melissaclarkshow.com.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Making a Difference. I'm Melissa Billy Clark. We are sitting here with an adrenaline junkie, hurricane chaser, Josh Morgerman. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Real good. Real great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are coming to the end of hurricane season here, and Josh not only chases hurricanes for his own pleasure, but he also researches it for scientific purposes. Take a look. Josh, what do you feel when you're inside the storm? That's incredible footage, by the way.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast of the U.S. and when I was a little kid, when I was a toddler, when a hurricane would come up the coast and it would hit, and our house would start to shake and the trees would wave, I'd have some kind of just like a reaction to it. It was like almost like it was just, it excited me somehow. And basically my whole life I've been chasing that feeling again and again. There's just some kind of, a rush that I get from it. I mean, for you to describe me as an adrenaline junkie is probably, I think there's some accuracy there. There's just some kind of feeling. I would say the closest thing I have to religion is being inside an intense hurricane. The sounds, the visuals, the way it feels in here, it's pretty incredible.
Wow. Do you ever get frightened when you're inside?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I would say that, this is the twisted thing, but really hardcore storm chasers like me, that's almost it's like you're wanting to get up to the edge of the cliff and look over it. And kind of the closer you get to that edge and the closer you get to falling off of it, the more meaningful the chase. I know that sounds really twisted, but it's almost like the fear is almost like what all my most memorable chases, I've been in 55 hurricanes, which is a record. And the ones that I remember, the ones that are really meaningful experiences, the one where I've done my best work scientifically in terms of research, were the scariest. They were the ones where there was a moment in that chase where I was like, man, this was a mistake.
Really?
Those are the ones that are the war stories. Those are the ones people want to hear about afterward. And like I said, those are the ones where I've collected the most meaningful scientific data. It's crazy.
So you do the field work. You're out in the field. And what devices do you use when you're working? And do you work with meteorologists?
So I'm independent. I work on my own, but scientists and meteorologists, including the folks at the National Hurricane Center, use my data. So my biggest thrill. So I talk about being an adrenaline junkie. So that's how it started for me. When I was chasing in my 20s, it was all just about the experience, the rush, the feeling. It changed over the years. My biggest joy now is going inside of hurricanes that are hitting remote locations, getting inside them and collecting data that otherwise wouldn't exist. Because a lot of hurricanes, they come ashore in the middle of nowhere. If one hits the east coast of Florida, there are like a million weather stations to record what's happening. But if they're coming ashore in a remote area of the Philippines or a part of the Mexican coast where there aren't any towns, for example, there might not be any data, no actual measurements from the ground when that hurricane comes ashore. But then you put me into the mix, I can go to those hard to reach remote places and get data that otherwise wouldn't exist. And that's my biggest joy now is when I measure a hurricane that otherwise wouldn't have been measured. And I send those data to scientists who then have more sort of puzzle pieces to work with as they try to understand afterward what happened. And so I am not personally a scientist, but I'm really good I'm like a hunting dog, and I hunt down the field data. I collect really good data, and then scientists and PhDs and all the smart people use my data.
Well, you went to Harvard.
I did. So I guess I'm not that dumb, but
Oh.
yeah, I did go to Harvard. I was a history major. You know, my father was more of a scientist type, but my parents, I had those kind of parents that were really kind of made all the decisions for me. They decided, all my extracurricular activities, where I applied to school, where I went to school. And my father was like, you're not going to go into meteorology. You're going to do liberal arts. So I was a history major, but I think he was actually right, because actually I think I am more of an artist at heart. I don't think I was actually cut out to be a scientist. I like the role that I play in the scientific community, where I'm collecting data that scientists use. But at the end of the day, I'm really more of an artist and kind of a storyteller, I feel like. And I feel like I like my role in the scientific community as this kind of weird non-scientist who's kind of adding his little perspective to it.
Can I just ask you, I'm just going to go off topic for 1 second, because my father was an historian. What kind of history did you study at Harvard?
So I was American history and specifically foreign policy. And if you want to get really specific, Cold War foreign policy. So my specialty was like 1950s US Cold War policy, and how we sort of contained the Soviet Union, and what we did in different countries to kind of contain communism. That was really my specialty and what I did, most of my work on. And it's still an area of interest for me. I'm actually a big sort of follower of, international relations and our foreign policy. It's what I sort of like, a lot of my leisure reading is about that. I know that sounds like a weird thing to me. That's kind of one of my hobbies outside. I don't regret it. If I could go back to college, I would study the same thing. I don't think that what you study in college needs to be your career. I don't look at college as like trade school. College for me was a place to learn and expand my mind. And I like my major very much.
I find that so fantastic. If my father passed away, but if he was here, I'd introduce you to him. You would have so much to talk about with him. I still have all of his books here. I have to save them.
Yeah, totally. And, I still have my big library I kept all my books from college because I really enjoy them and I like to reread them. Yeah, I think historians are all, really fetishize their books.
It's true. That's why I kept them. Thank you for letting me bring that memory with you.
That's awesome.
That's
so awesome to know that. Well, yeah. By the way, just if I might ask, what was his area and specialty?
Oh, he loved World War. I have all these World War books. He read the history of Hitler. Yeah. I mean, just there's books here that you wouldn't believe.
You could just make a whole career just studying World War II and the Third Reich and Hitler. So yeah, that's a very rich topic. So yeah.
It's wonderful. And 19th century poetry he loved as well, because it told stories that you don't hear about nowadays, So yeah. Thank you, Josh, so much for that. I appreciate it. Now back to hurricanes. Why was 2020 hurricane season so historic?
Well, it smashed one of the records. So every year we have a lot of tropical cyclones forming over the Atlantic. And if they reach tropical storm intensity, they earn a name. Like they'll be named, Laura or Sally or whatever.
Right.
So we have pretty good records, pretty accurate records, fairly complete records going back to 1851. And so we have about 170 years of data. So 2020 has had more named storms than any other year going back to 1851. Now, I want to express one caveat. It's very possible there was maybe a season in the 1860s or 1870s before we had satellites monitoring the whole planet that probably where a few storms were missed by ships at sea. So it's possible there was another season that maybe had more storms. But in terms of what we know about, this was the most active season on record in terms of the number of storms. We're up to 30 now. And actually, what's really crazy, it's November, which is very late in the hurricane season. November 30th is officially when hurricane season ends. Right. But right now we have a Category 5 hurricane, that's at the top of the intensity scale. We have a Category 5 hurricane down in the Caribbean about to strike Nicaragua. So that's super late in the year for such a strong hurricane. It's like the season that won't end. So we're up to, 30 named storms, which is just record smashing.
Is that explaining the high winds here? We're in New York City. We have very high winds from last night and still till today.
Not related in any way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, hurricanes are big, but they're not that big. Yeah, that's just, there's a lot of, listen, all weather systems are kind of interrelated. It's this kind of, quilt of different, sort of systems that vaguely interact with each other. But what you had in New York was unrelated to the hurricane, which is way, way, way deep, deep, deep in the tropics, like way down there, about as far south as you can get for a hurricane.
Oh, wow. Okay. I got to go to Harvard. So what can we expect for 2021 besides all this craziness?
It's hard to know. So there are a couple of scientists who actually, their specialty is predicting what the next season will bring, called seasonal forecasting. And those scientists who specialize in that have not come up with their 2021 predictions yet. I'll say this though, big picture. What we've noticed from those 170 years of data is that hurricane activity is it goes through cycles in the Atlantic, okay? Mm-hmm. And as I care about the Atlantic, because the hurricanes that hit the United States come off the Atlantic, okay? Hurricanes form over water, over oceans, and then they come, not all of them, but some of them hit land, and that's when they make news. So what we find is that Atlantic activity is very up and down. We'll have very, very busy periods where there's just like a ton of hurricanes, and then we'll have kind of dead periods. Mm-hmm. And those phases will last 10 to 30 years. It seems like we're in a busy phase right now. For 10 years, like from 2006 to 2016, things were kind of on the quiet side. 2017, things really went crazy. We've had a lot of big hurricanes making the news, like Hurricane Maria, which smashed Puerto Rico, which was really devastating. Hurricane Michael, which devastated Florida. We seem to be now in a busy phase. So that says to me that next year could be busy as well. But it's hard to know just yet. But the big picture is it looks like we're in a busy phase right now for the Atlantic and specifically for American hurricanes. And I will add one other record, since we're talking about the 2020 season, another record wasn't broken but was tied, was 6 hurricanes struck the mainland U.S. this year. Mm-hmm. That ties the record set in 1886 and 1985. So there have only been 3 years where the U.S. was stricken by 6 hurricane eyes across the American coastline. So that's another, not a smashed record, but a tied record.
And are scientists concerned that hurricanes might get stronger? And if so,
well, there is concern about that. So climate change means that the planet seems to be warming and the ocean seems to be warming. Now hurricanes are heat engines, and they get their strength from warm ocean water. Hurricanes are tropical cyclones, meaning they form in or near the tropics, and their fuel is warm water. And that's why, for example, Canada, if Canada gets a hurricane, it's usually just a category 1 and weakening because the water up there is really cold. Whereas down near Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, or down further south, down like Mexico, Nicaragua, water's really warm down there. So hurricanes are like heat engines. So back to your question. So since the planet does seem to be warming and ocean temperatures are warming, there's a belief that, okay, maybe that's adding to hurricane intensity. So it's a little more complicated than that. You have a lot of armchair meteorologists on Twitter who are like, well, warm water means more hurricanes and stronger hurricanes. It's a little more complicated than that because there are other factors besides just water temperatures. But there was a peer-reviewed scientific paper that came out in the last couple of years that suggests that there does seem to be some connection, and that while there aren't necessarily more hurricanes from climate change, it looks like maybe of the hurricanes that do form, maybe more of them are getting very strong, meaning reaching category 4 and category 5. It's still being studied, but there do seem to be some initial, let's say, correlations.
What was your favorite hurricane to be in?
Well, I don't want to call them favorites because, the ones that are most memorable to me were also, tremendously destructive and brought great misery. But I will say that in terms of a hurricane that was the most meaningful to me, and the one that I felt like I collected the best data, was actually Hurricane Dorian last year. Dorian was a super duper intense category 5 hurricane, which hit Great Abaco Island in the Bahamas. Now, made it historically significant was that when it made land, when the center of it passed over Abaco Island, it had estimated sustained winds of 185 miles an hour with gusts way over 200. That tied it with a hurricane Florida in 1935 as being the strongest hurricane on record to hit North America, and right through the eye of it. And I collected some amazing data. It was incredibly scary. Hurricane like that are nuts. You know, these are hurricanes that smash concrete buildings, cars fly. I mean, it's like nuts. I was in a concrete school and the walls were just shaking from the force of the wind. It was quite frightening. And we went through the eye. And I don't know if your listeners understand this, but so hurricane is a big swirl.
Right.
And as you get closer to the center, the winds get stronger, the rain gets heavier, and then you get in what's called the inner core. And that's where it's worse. That's where the winds just go nuts. You know, roofs rip off of houses, cars get thrown around, just stuff like that. But then when you get to the exact center, everything stops. You're in the eye. So the exact center is completely calm. So you get into this area where all of a sudden the wind or the rain just stops, the sun might come out, and you can just see it above. It's like a circle, and you're in the eye of the hurricane. And that'll last, it could be a few minutes, it could be a couple of hours, but you get this break. And then the backside of the hurricane comes in, the other side of it. So then it hits again, but going the other way. The wind's blowing the other way because it's a big circle. So that's one of the things that makes a hurricane super like acid trippy is that when you're in the worst part of the hurricane and the most crazy part, it just stops as you go through the exact center. And if you look at a satellite picture of a hurricane, you can see it. Yeah, it's like a big swirl. And when you look at the center, you see a little dot. That's the eye.
Interesting. And what are some of the lessons from this hurricane season, and what are useful takeaways for homeowners?
Let's talk first about the hurricanes. So hurricane forecasters have two tasks. One is to say, where is the hurricane going? Mm-hmm. And the other is to say how strong it's going to be. Now, the science of forecasting where it's going has gotten better and better. They've gotten really good at forecasting the track of the hurricane, where the center is going to cross the coast, where the worst of it's going to hit. It's not 100%, but it's gotten much better over the years. The other thing, forecasting how strong it's going to be, that remains a mystery. The scientists still do not completely understand the dynamics of why some hurricanes just go nuclear and why some fall apart. The takeaway for coastal residents, in the United States or anywhere else is, as a hurricane is coming, you do not know until it's crossing the coast. You don't know how strong it's going to be. So if it's approaching as a category 1, don't just feel, oh, it's just a category 1, because it might just explode and get very intense in those final hours before shore. And surprise people. And that happened a couple of times this year. A couple of the hurricanes that hit the U.S., like Laura in Louisiana, or Sally in Alabama, or Zeta in Louisiana and Mississippi. Those were all hurricanes where they did not expect them to strengthen so much just before landfall. And what happened was, when they struck, folks were a little surprised by how strong they were. I mean, the Hurricane Center did an amazing job, but within the available science. And also the opposite can happen. Sometimes they forecast a really intense hurricane and then it just falls apart. So that's one thing. Mm-hmm. Another thing is that people say, Tampa's overdue for a hurricane because it hasn't had one in a while. It doesn't work like that, and there's no location that's overdue. Hurricanes are pretty random. Just because a place was stricken last year doesn't mean that it won't get stricken again. And just because a place has gone 100 years without a hurricane doesn't mean that it's more likely to get a hurricane. There's none of that. And what we saw this year was some interesting things where we had a couple of places that got stricken repeatedly, like Southwest Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana. They got nailed by 2 strong hurricanes. One came so soon after the other that there were still piles of wreckage and debris in the streets from the first hurricane. So because you haven't had a hurricane for a long time doesn't mean that you're going to get one. And just because you just had one doesn't mean that you won't get one. Another thing I want to say, and this really applies to this year as we're talking, is the hurricane season is not over till it's over. So folks tend to think, well, the worst of it's over by September. No, we're in November and we have a Category 5 hurricane in the Caribbean. It is, especially a year like this, it just keeps on giving, and people need to stay vigilant.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody can go on a cruise. We went on a cruise right after Sandy. We couldn't get our money back, and that was the biggest mistake we ever made. We were going up the stairs and the boat was going down. We got all the aftermath.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Sandy was, Sandy was at the end of October, which is, generally pretty late in the season. But occasionally, I have followers on Twitter who, they're like, oh, I'm so sad. It's like September, October, and they're sad about their cruise getting canceled or rerouted. I'm like, if you scheduled a cruise in August, September, or October in the Atlantic, I'm sorry, you asked for it. It's hurricane season. Don't schedule cruises during hurricane season. I mean, actually, I take that back. I don't want the whole cruise industry to like attack.
I know.
Not to book cruises. What I will say is just be very zen about what happens because it's hurricane season.
Some people might like that. They could be adrenaline junkies like you, and they might like it.
Exactly. I mean, I do think that there's kind of like a gene you're born with. Like I would say there's a certain percent of the population that kind of has that sort of storm chaser gene. And maybe they're not, professional storm chasers like me, but there's, when a hurricane's coming, they get excited about it. And I meet them. I meet sometimes like just ordinary people who I could tell they want the hurricane to hit. They want to see it. And I'm like, okay, they have the gene,
Yeah.
they have it, they're excited rather than scared.
How long have you been doing this for, Josh?
Oh, since almost 30 years now. I mean, since I was really young. My first chase, I did it. I was too young to get a car and everything. So I chased it on a train. So yeah, that's crazy. And this is before the internet, before mobile phones.
Yeah.
I had like a duffel bag with, some clothes and a paper map to track the hurricane and just $200 cash. And that was my very first chase. I look back at it and I'm like, oh my God, little did I know that was the first of, this multi-decade odyssey that it's been.
What are the common mistakes that homeowners make when preparing for a hurricane? Mistakes that can actually cause more damage?
I would say the number one thing, I would say if you really, in terms of short-term preparation, meaning you can't make any meaningful structural changes to your home because the hurricane's going to hit in like 2 days. I would say the number one thing is to get those windows covered. That's so much damage to a home happens. It starts with, flying debris hits the window, smashes it, then the wind gets in, and that does two things. One, it causes tremendous water damage inside. But two, once the wind gets in the structure, that's when it can really start doing crazy stuff like lifting the roof up and stuff like that. It's almost like once the wind gets in, it's almost like game over. So it's really critical to make sure those windows are covered. I lived half the year in Mississippi, in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, which is the heart of hurricane country. And down here, a lot of people just have hurricane shutters that they could just close anytime, to keep their houses secure. If you don't have hurricane shutters, then you board your windows. But I would say that's a really important thing. And I also want to dispel some myths. One is that crisscrossing windows with tape is helpful. It's not. That's just, people have been doing that for ages, and it's not helpful. You want to protect your windows. You cover them with shutters or boarding.
Right.
That's one really important thing. And then another is folks have this, folks often say, oh, open windows to ventilate the house, to let the wind pass through. That's actually, that's an old wives' tale. Keep the house sealed during the hurricane. Don't let the wind in. Keep the windows covered. That's like really important. And then just really simple stuff. When you have really strong wind, that just throws stuff around. Things like lawn furniture, trampolines, like just recreational stuff. I mean, you name it, barbecues, umbrellas, all that stuff in a hurricane becomes flying missiles.
Right.
That'll damage. And a lot of the wind damage that happens in a hurricane is from stuff like that flying and striking structures, So, and you'd be amazed, you'd be amazed what can fly in a strong hurricane. So it's such a simple thing and people don't do it, but get all that stuff inside before the hurricane hits, and you'll minimize damage to your home and the homes of your neighbors.
Do you recommend putting it in the shed or putting it in your home?
If your shed is strong enough, if you think it's going to stay up, then the shed is fine. You know, if the shed is a really flimsy type, or the whole thing is just going to blow away, then you know maybe get those things. Get those things where the wind's not going to reach them, because you don't want flying missiles. So much of hurricane wind damage is from flying debris.
Mm-hmm. What about your cars? What do you recommend if they don't have a garage?
It's a great question, because, you know, after a really bad hurricane, you will see tremendous damage to cars, you know, you know, I've come out of hotels after bad hurricanes, and every single car in the parking lot has smashed windows, mirrors ripped off, bumpers ripped off, like the hoods ripped open. I mean, hurricane winds are serious stuff. So definitely you want to get the car inside. But I will say this, if you can't, just park it away from trees. In fact, we just had a hurricane in Mississippi. You know, I'm in base St. Louis, Mississippi, and we had a hurricane 2 weeks ago. Crazy enough, I've been here all summer, you know, getting in the car and hunting down hurricanes from Texas to Florida. The final hurricane, which I believe is the final hurricane to hit the U.S. this year, actually nailed my town right here. We got a direct hit. I didn't have to chase it. I just stayed home. But as the winds really started to crank, I realized, you know, I'm the hurricane chaser. I should be the expert, right? This big tree in the front yard was waving like crazy. And I'm like, that's going to fall in the car and squash it. And I had to go out, you know, just before the worst winds hit. And I moved the car. And where did I move it? I live next to a big health club. Mm-hmm. And they have a huge open parking lot. I just parked the car in the middle of the parking lot. So it was far away from any telephone poles, any trees, anything. And Brilliant. The tree stayed up, thank God. But the point is that even if the winds got crazy, unless some like flying object hit it, nothing was going to fall in the car, because it was in a nice kind of open space. Now, that said, if you're in a category 4, category 5 hurricane, the winds will sometimes just pick up cars and throw them. But then it's like, you can't do anything about that.
A lot of people stay in their home. They stay put. What do you say to them if it's a really bad hurricane? Where should they go for shelter?
Well, you know, it depends on the intensity of the hurricane. And of course, I said before that you never know until the hurricane crosses the coast how strong it's going to be. So, you know, you never know. You know, the Hurricane Michael, which hit the Florida Panhandle 2 years ago, just 2 days before it hit, it was supposed to come ashore as a category 1, but when it hit, it was a 5. So yeah, you never know. I would say know how well constructed your house is. So if you live in a mobile home or a trailer, definitely do not ride out any hurricane in a mobile home. That's not a good idea, because they tend not to be very wind resistant. They can be death traps in windstorms. Well-built single-family homes can withstand very intense hurricanes. In something like a category 4 or 5 where the winds get crazy, you might want to consider riding out the hurricane in a shelter or a municipal building. You know, big buildings like hospitals, schools, big hotels tend to be more safe. And one of the reasons for that is, think about it, it's a really big structure. There are a lot of layers to it. So if the wind gets crazy, you can get in an interior hallway. The trick when you're in really crazy wind, like, you know, let's say category 5 hurricane, winds of 160 miles an hour or more, you want to get as many walls between you and the wind as possible. Now, if you're in like I live in a small cottage here in Mississippi, there are no interior rooms. It's a very small house. So there's no interior rooms. Every room has an exterior wall. That's not ideal. Whereas if you're in like let's say a big hotel, you can get an interior hallway and have several walls between you and the wind. And that's going to generally be more safe. I will say this. It's important to listen to local officials and what they tell you. They will often give evacuation orders. And I think that, you know, it's prudent to do as directed.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much for that. And what would you recommend if someone is looking to build a new home or reconstruct their home for Mother Nature safety?
Well, this is an area that's I'm very excited about recently, because you know, what I notice, the places that are stricken by hurricanes are also, and that are vulnerable to hurricanes, are also amazing places to live. Like I'm thinking, for example, coastal Mississippi, where I live. You know, I live in a town that's right on the Gulf Coast, and it's gorgeous. You're right on the water. It's beautiful, and you want to be like close to it. But that Gulf of Mexico, which is generally our friend, also sends in occasionally category 5 hurricanes, and it's scary. So the solution is how do you have a place that you feel you have some peace of mind that it's going to withstand. And I started working with Deltec Homes recently as a brand ambassador, and I'm very excited about this. So Deltec creates homes that are hurricane resistant, and I was blown away. So I told you before about Hurricane Dorian, strongest hurricane on record to hit North America.
Yes.
So the inner core of this hurricane passed over Great Abaco Islands, and there were a couple of Deltec homes that went through this hurricane. So this was the ultimate test, and houses all around them just blew away like balsa wood. The Deltec homes survived with just minor scratches and very little damage because of the way these things are constructed. And Hurricane Dorian was the ultimate test. And I'm like, wow, to have that peace of mind, to have a house that you know can withstand Category 5 winds, that to me is, I think that's where it's at. I think just having a home that you know can withstand these forces, and homes that have been proven to win what I call the ultimate test, that to me is what I'd recommend. And Deltec homes, they're a little unique. One of the trademark things about them is that they're round. They're literally a, so that's by design, because this is really interesting. When the wind is hitting a house, the weak points are the corners. It's some aerodynamic thing, but the wind is the weak points, the areas where they fail are the right angles. If the house is a circle, the wind doesn't have the force of the wind is distributed evenly. So there's no sort of point of failure.
Sure.
So that's houses can withstand these winds. Also because they're made of like this incredible, like it's called Southern Yellow Pine, which is a kind of wood that's twice as strong as normal wood. And also the way they're sort of created in a laboratory and then put together on the spot. They're perfectly engineered. But so sorry to go on about these, but I'm really excited about it because specifically as someone who's living part of the year in hurricane country, I've become very conscious of, okay, if I want to buy a house here, how can I have peace of mind? And I feel that Deltec Homes is really, sorry to go on about it. I'm just very excited about it.
That's okay. I saw a couple of the homes and they actually have a lot of windows, which is wonderful. I mean, that's part of the plan, I guess. I guess they're using really heavy material.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because, anyone can have a house that is completely can withstand any winds. You can create a concrete bunker with 3 foot thick cement walls, but like who wants to live in that? It's like,
yeah, you want to see the outside.
yeah, especially if you're living on the Gulf Coast or the East Coast of Florida. It's like the whole point is you want to like experience like the environment and the air and the sunshine. And that's what I think is so cool about the Deltec homes is that they're open and airy and yet as strong as a concrete bunker. So you're kind of getting the strength of the concrete bunker, but you're also, you're having a, you're not living in a bunker. It has this kind of airiness. And I think that's the cool thing. And that's just sort of the elegance of the engineering, which is it's strong yet open.
Yeah, I like the homes. They're very modern looking and they're beautiful and they serve a purpose. If they would like to look at the homes, please head over to deltechhomes.com. And thank you so much. Yeah. Where can people find you, Josh?
Yeah, so I welcome new followers. If you want to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, it's iCyclone. So the letter I and the word cyclone.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for having me. It's been a real pleasure to chat.
Thank you, sir.
If you have a vegan product, make your vegan claim official with the only accredited vegan trademark in the world. Visit www.beveg.com. That's www.beveg.com to apply now. Making a Difference is sponsored by Preferred Health Magazine. Please visit www.preferredhealthmagazine.com today and subscribe.